surrounded the city of Jerusalem.
Yeah, which is basically a death sentence in the ancient world.
Right, absolutely. What followed was, just one of the most brutal sieges in human history. By the time the legions actually breached the walls, over 1 million people had been slaughtered or, just subjected to horrific starvation.
It was a total meat grinder. No one gets out.
Exactly. A complete, inescapable bloodbath. Yet, and here's the crazy part, amidst that total annihilation, an entire community of early Christians, I'm talking thousands of people living right inside the target zone, they basically just packed up and walked away completely untouched.
Untouched, which sounds impossible.
Right. And they didn't have inside military intelligence or political connections. They escaped because they possessed this heavily coded ancient text. And more importantly, they actually knew how to read it. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today, we have a massive stack of theological transcripts centering on what scholars call the Olivet discourse. And our mission for you listening is to take these ancient texts, which, deal heavily with prophecy in the end times, and just completely demystify them. So, okay, let's unpack this, because whenever people bring up biblical prophecy or the apocalypse, it instantly veers into sensationalism.
Oh, immediately.
Right. You get internet sleuths drawing chaotic conspiracy charts on whiteboards or people buying bunkers in the desert. And we are just stripping all of that away today to look at the raw, actual mechanics of these texts.
Which is absolutely the necessary approach here because, reading prophecy is fundamentally an exercise in epistemology.
Epistemology, like how we know what we know.
Exactly. Jesus explicitly opens and closes the Olivet discourse with a very specific, very clear command, which is, take heed that no man deceive you. So the entire framework isn't crystal ball. It's a masterclass in how to avoid deception.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the early believers who survived that Roman siege we just talked about.
Right.
They didn't do so because they were, casually skimming the text for emotional comfort. They survived because they paid clinical, forensic attention to the precise wording.
So precision is everything.
Right. When you bring your own presumptions to the text or try to mash all these different accounts together into some generalized summary, you just blind yourself to the actual mechanisms at play.
Mashing the texts together, that is actually exactly where I want to start, because the transcripts highlight this major trap that readers fall into.
The harmonization trap.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Olivet discourse, which is this specific moment where the disciples ask Jesus for the signs of the end of the age, it's recorded in multiple historical biographies, specifically Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Right.
And the standard approach for, centuries has just been to harmonize them. People assume these writers are basically journalists sitting in the exact same press briefing, jotting down the exact same speech.
Which seems logical on the surface.
It does, but reading the actual text side by side, that harmonized approach completely falls apart. The timelines actually contradict each other.
They absolutely clash, yeah. If you force them into a single timeline, it's a mess. To understand how these texts actually function, you really have to apply the concept of resolving power.
Right, resolving power. I was thinking about this like optics, like with telescopes.
Okay, yeah, break that down.
So if I'm an amateur astronomer and I look up at a specific coordinate in the night sky with a cheap, low-resolution telescope, I'm going to see a single, slightly blurry star.
Just one point of light.
Exactly. But if I upgrade my equipment to a high-powered telescope, one with much greater resolving power, I look at those exact same coordinates and I realize, oh, wait, I am entirely wrong. It's not one
Right, it's a binary system.
Yes, it's a binary star system. Two distinct celestial bodies, separated by millions of light years that just happen to overlap perfectly from my limited vantage point here on Earth.
That is the perfect mechanical model for what we are looking at in the texts of Matthew and Luke. If you read them with a low-resolution approach, they look like identical twins. Both writers catalog this really terrifying cluster of global phenomena. Nation rising against nation, severe famines, widespread pestilences, massive earthquakes.
Stuff that sounds very apocalyptic.
Very. And Matthew refers to these specific events as the beginning of sorrows, which is essentially the initial birth pangs of a global crisis.
So I totally see how people assume they're just identical accounts. But applying that higher resolving power, the moment you look closely at the syntax, the timelines pivot in completely opposite directions based on those exact global signs.
Exactly. Look at Luke's account.
Right. In Luke, Jesus lists out the global chaos, the earthquakes and famines, but then he inserts this crucial chronological marker. Luke writes, "But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you."
Before all these.
Yeah. Luke is charting a localized destruction of Jerusalem that must happen prior to the global collapse.
And Matthew's text does the exact inverse of that.
Really?
Yeah, Matthew lists the same global signs, the famines, the earthquakes, but his chronological marker points the other way. Matthew writes, "Then shall they deliver you up."
Oh, wow. Then, meaning after.
Exactly, meaning the massive persecution and the ultimate desolation Matthew is warning about is triggered after the period of global chaos.
Wait, I have to stop you there. They aren't just giving slightly different vantage points of the same Roman siege. You are saying they are mapping out two entirely different destructions of Jerusalem, separated by this enormous gulf of time?
That's exactly what I'm saying. They are mapping out two distinct events for two distinctly different audiences.
Different audiences.
Yeah, the linguistic markers in the source text make this undeniable, honestly. Matthew is writing for a distinctly Jewish demographic. He traces the lineage of Jesus specifically back to Abraham. He focuses on Jesus' role as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. His entire narrative structure points toward a final, ultimate destruction occurring at the end of an age. Mechanically, Matthew even includes this hyper-specific warning for his readers to pray that their flight doesn't happen on the Sabbath day.
Oh. Which only makes sense if you are bound by a Jewish law. Like, if you are geographically in Judea and strictly observing the Sabbath, the city gates are closed and locked.
Yep.
Your travel radius is severely legally restricted. You literally cannot flee.
Precisely. It is a localized, culturally specific mechanism. Luke, however, is writing for a Gentile audience.
That's non-Jewish.
Right. He traces the lineage of Jesus all the way back to Adam, representing all of humanity. He focuses on Jesus as the Son of Man. Because he's writing to a broader audience, he outlines a completely different timeline. The first localized destruction of Jerusalem that happens before the global cosmic signs.
So looking through our high-resolution telescope, desolation number 1 is recorded by Luke.
Correct.
And desolation number 2 is recorded by Matthew.
You got it.
Okay, so let's focus our optics entirely on that first star desolation number 1. Because this is the timeline Luke mapped out, and this is the specific text that allowed that community of early believers to survive the slaughter in 70 AD. How did they actually pull that off?
By doing the one thing people struggle with, taking the text literally and observing the geopolitical movements of their era.
Okay.
Luke's text provides a hyper-practical, unmistakable trigger for action. Jesus tells them, "When you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh."
Compassed with armies, so surrounded.
Surrounded. And the instructions that follow are absolute. Do not hesitate. Let those in Judea flee to the mountains. If you are on your rooftop, do not even go downstairs into your house to pack a bag.
See, but that sounds completely counterintuitive from a purely tactical standpoint. If your fortified city is suddenly surrounded by heavily armed Roman legions, the absolute worst thing you can do is open the gates and try to run past them into the mountains.
You'd be cut down instantly.
Instantly. You'd be dead.
Which is why the historical mechanics of this event are just so staggering.
Yeah.
So the Roman campaign against Jerusalem was commanded by Vespasian and his son Titus. And we actually have a historian, Josephus.
Right, Josephus. He was the Jewish military leader who surrendered.
Right. Surrendered to the Romans and then literally documented the war for them. He provides this horrifying firsthand account of the siege.
I can only imagine.
It was brutal. The Roman encirclement was designed to starve the city into submission. And inside Jerusalem, the factions were actually turning on each other. They were burning their own food supplies in these crazy internal power struggles.
Just speeding up the starvation.
Exactly. The death toll climbed over 1 million. It was a suffocating lockdown meat grinder.
So how on earth does a community of thousands just walk out of a lockdown meat grinder? The text says, when you see the city surrounded, flee. But physically, the encirclement prevents the flight.
Right. Well, they survived because of a massive geopolitical shockwave that emanated from Rome. In the year 68 AD, right in the middle of this campaign, Emperor Nero commits suicide.
Whoa, just right in the middle of the war.
Right. And this plunges the Roman Empire into a chaotic succession crisis known as the Year of the Four Emperors.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah. Vespasian realizes the throne is up for grabs, so he abruptly halts the siege of Jerusalem. He basically has to consolidate his legions and redirect his focus back toward Rome to secure his own imperial power.
That is incredible. The Roman war machine just suddenly, powers down and backs away from the wall.
Just packs up and leaves. temporarily.
If you are a rebel inside Jerusalem, you are probably celebrating this as a massive divine victory. You think, like, we did it. We outlasted the mighty Roman Empire.
Oh, absolutely. But the early Christians didn't celebrate because they were reading Luke's source code.
Ah.
They didn't view the Roman retreat as a victory. They viewed it as the exact trigger mechanism Jesus had warned them about.
Because they saw the city had been compassed by armies.
Exactly. They recognized the momentary pause, not as a permanent peace, but as a fleeting window. They followed the instruction to the letter. They didn't pack. They didn't delay. They immediately abandoned Jerusalem and fled across the Jordan River to a mountain town called Pella.
Wow.
And when Vespasian's son, Titus, returned to finish the siege with absolute brutality, the Christians were already gone.
They didn't spiritualize the warning. They didn't, turn it into a metaphor about overcoming personal obstacles or whatever.
No metaphors.
They read the geopolitical signs, matched them to their text, and physically moved. Which, that leads us to a massive question. If Luke's incredibly precise warning was entirely fulfilled in 70 AD, what triggers Matthew's timeline for the second destruction?
Right, the second star.
Because Matthew's text centers entirely around a phrase that sounds like a total riddle. So here's where it gets really interesting. We need to define the abomination of desolation.
Yeah, the abomination of desolation. It is the hinge point of Matthew's entire prophecy.
Okay, break that down for us in plain English.
To understand it mechanically, we just look at the terminology. An abomination in this ancient context is an idol, right? A physical representation of a false pagan god.
Okay.
The desolation aspect describes the profound desecration of placing that idol into the most restricted sacred architecture on earth, which is the Holy of Holies, inside the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. It is basically the ultimate act of defilement.
Okay, but I have a major chronological problem with this. I'm looking at the historical timeline in the transcripts, and this exact event, an idol being placed in the Holy of Holies, it already happened in 167 BC.
It did, yeah.
So you're telling me Jesus, standing in the 1st century, is warning his followers about a trigger event that happened 2 centuries before he was even born. How does that function as a future prophecy?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to understand why Jesus invokes the 167 BC. He's not confused about history. He is tapping into the deepest cultural trauma of the Jewish people to establish an unmistakable pattern.
A pattern?
Yeah. So in 167 BC, there was a Seleucid king named Antiochus V Epiphanes.
Right.
And he didn't just want to conquer Judea politically. His socio-political goal was complete Hellenization.
Making them Greek.
Exactly. He wanted to culturally erase the Jewish people by destroying their distinct religious practices. He criminalized Sabbath observance. He criminalized circumcision, all under penalty of death.
He essentially tried to legislate the Jewish identity completely out of existence.
That was exactly his strategy. And the culminating mechanism of this cultural genocide was his assault on the temple. Antiochus erected a huge statue of the Greek god Zeus directly inside the Holy of Holies.
Wow.
And then he slaughtered a pig on the sacred altar. The pig, being ritually unclean, was chosen specifically to maximize the desecration.
Just maximum insult.
Exactly. It was an act of psychological warfare designed to just break the spirit of the people. But instead, it triggered a massive guerrilla uprising known as the Maccabean Revolt.
Right, which the Jewish people eventually won, right? They
Yeah.
recaptured the temple, they cleansed it, and rededicated the altar.
Which is actually the historical basis for the festival of Hanukkah.
Yes, exactly.
So when Jesus brings up the abomination of desolation, he isn't introducing some vague new concept. He is referencing a historical wound that every single person in his audience felt in their bones.
Yes. Jesus is establishing a historical blueprint. In Matthew's account, he says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place." He is saying, look back at what Antiochus did. Look at the mechanics of that desecration. In the future, a global geopolitical leader is going to replicate that exact same pattern.
So the blueprint plays out again.
Yes, when that ultimate desecration happens in a rebuilt temple, that is the literal trigger mechanism for Matthew's timeline. It inaugurates a period of unprecedented global conflict that Matthew terms the Great Tribulation. Okay, so let me get this straight. The telescope reveals Desolation 1, triggered by armies in 70 AD, and then Desolation 2, triggered by a repeated abomination in the temple at the end of the age.
That's the binary star system.
But that leaves us with a gaping chronological void. You have the 1st century, and you have some ultimate future timeline. For you, listening to this right now, where do you exist on this map? How do we orient ourselves in this massive gap? between the stars.
Well, the transcripts point us toward a totally different text to fill that chronological gap.
Which one?
The Book of Revelation. It was authored by the Apostle John while in exile on the island of Patmos around 95 AD. So this is a couple of decades after the Romans leveled Jerusalem.
Okay.
And the opening chapters of Revelation consist of 7 specific letters addressed to 7 literal congregations in Asia Minor.
But the sources suggest these aren't just like administrative memos to local congregations.
Not at all.
If you analyze the incredibly specific commendations and rebukes in these letters, they function mechanically as a prophetic map of distinct church eras, stretching from the 1st century entirely through to the modern day.
The chronological mapping is profound when you look at the socio-political dynamics of each era.
So let's run through them.
Sure. The first letter goes to Ephesus. They represent the early apostolic era. John commends their doctrinal purity, but the rebuke is that they have abandoned their first love.
First love. So mechanically, what does that mean?
It means they maintained strict orthodoxy, but lost the genuine relational devotion that fueled the early movement. It just became procedural.
Cold theology.
Exactly.
Then you move chronologically to Pergamos.
Right. Pergamos represents a massive shift. This is the era when the church essentially marries the secular power structure, mirroring the time of Constantine.
Ah, right.
The church transitions from being a hunted underground movement to an institution adopted and funded by the Roman Empire. The spiritual compromise there is catastrophic.
Yeah, mixing state power with faith.
Yeah.
And then it just continues to degrade. You hit Sardis, which maps to the denominational era. The text tells Sardis, you have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead.
Wow. Brutal.
Right. It perfectly describes these massive bureaucratic religious systems that have historical prestige, but zero actual vitality.
Empty shells.
Yeah. And finally, the timeline lands on Laodicea, which represents the modern apostate church era.
The current era.
Right. Their defining characteristic is a dangerous delusion. They brag about being incredibly wealthy and needing absolutely nothing, while the text diagnoses them as wretched, miserable, and entirely blind to their own reality.
Blind to their own reality. That is a brutally negative trajectory.
Right. If this map accurately charts the historical erosion of the church into bureaucracy and delusion, what is the alternative? Like, did any of these eras actually possess the right mechanics?
Actually, yes. Only 2 out of the 7 churches receive absolutely no rebuke or correction.
Just perfect report cards.
Basically, yeah. The first is Smyrna. Now, the root word of Smyrna is myrrh, which is a resin heavily associated with death, embalming, and bitterness.
Oh, wow.
Unsurprisingly, Smyrna represents the heavily persecuted church.
So their success wasn't based on political influence or money. It was based on sheer endurance.
Exactly. Their mandate wasn't to fix their theology or build bigger buildings. It was a singular directive. Remain faithful unto death.
Man. Okay, who is the other one?
The only other congregation to receive a clean report card is Philadelphia, which maps to the era of the true, vibrant missionary church.
Ah, Philadelphia. Brotherly love.
Right. And what's fascinating here is the stark contrast between these 2 exemplary churches and the failing ones.
Right.
Smyrna and Philadelphia didn't succeed because they accumulated massive secular power like Pergamos.
Right.
Or extreme wealth like Laodicea. Or even rigid academic prestige like Ephesus.
They succeeded through pure, unadulterated devotion.
Exactly.
They stayed entirely focused on the core mission rather than, trying to build an empire on Earth.
Yeah, that's the key difference.
Which really brings us to the ultimate synthesis of all these sources. So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive talking about reading ancient instruction manuals without bringing our own baggage to the text.
Right.
We looked through the high-resolution telescope to separate the first-century survival guide of Luke from the ultimate global warning of Matthew. We decoded the sociopolitical trauma of Antiochus IV to understand the mechanics of the abomination of desolation. And we just charted the historical erosion of the church through the letters of Revelation. So why does this complex ancient epistemology matter to you today?
It matters because having access to the text is entirely useless if you lack the critical capacity to interpret and apply it.
Very true.
I mean, the believers in Jerusalem in 70 AD didn't survive just because they were religious.
No.
They survived because they were incredibly astute observers of reality. They saw the specific geopolitical movements of the Roman legions. They saw the power vacuum created by Nero's death. They mapped those variables against the specific parameters of their source text, and they executed a precise action.
They literally walked out the fire door when it opened.
Exactly. The ultimate lesson we pull from these transcripts isn't how to draw a better, chart of the end times. It is a masterclass in maintaining intense situational awareness.
Yes.
We live in a society drowning in a deluge of low-resolution information. The mechanics of survival require you to stop generalizing, increase your resolving power, and pay clinical attention to the actual data.
They survived because they understood the resolving power of their own era. I love that. They saw the binary stars clearly when everyone else just saw a blur.
Yeah.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on as we wrap up. We've seen how reading the literal, precise mechanics of an ancient text allowed thousands of people to casually walk out of an inescapable historical slaughter. They possessed a flawless survival guide for the first century simply because they paid attention.
Just paid attention.
Thanks for joining us on this hour on the Archive Hour. Join us on our next hour as we bring you more adventures from the Bible.